Even looking at the life of Joseph, Joseph teaches us that even when everything looks like it's going wrong, God is at work. He is working. Joseph was born a beloved son with 11 brothers. To his father Jacob, he was the favourite. Now we know we shouldn't play favourites, but Jacob did. Jacob loved Joseph, and he didn't hide the fact. And he gave Joseph a coat of many colours. And his brothers resented that. God gave Joseph dreams to interpret dreams. And Joseph shared a dream one day of people bowing down to him. And it spoke of really his brothers and father. And this offended his brothers. And they got it in for him. They wanted to do him wrong. And one day Jacob sent Joseph to go and see how his brothers were going. They were some 60 miles away, pasturing the flock, looking up some 60 miles distant. And Jacob sent Joseph to run an errand and take some. And his brothers saw him coming. And we take up the story in verse 19 of Genesis 37. His brothers looked out and they saw him coming in his multicoloured coat. Joseph. And they said one to another, "Behold, this dreamer cometh." Verse 20, they said, "Come now, therefore, let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him. And we shall see what will become of his dreams." He was forsaken by his brother. He was just 17 here, just 17 years old. And his brothers had it in for him such that they wanted to kill their very brother. They cast him into the... They were heartless, cruel. They wanted to do him in. And then they happened to see some slave traders going past. And they sold their brother into slavery for just a few dollars. Joseph's life was changed at that moment. From being the beloved to being a slave in an unknown land, Egypt. Joseph's life was struck with disappointment. It can happen to all of us. Disappointments. Yet we know that our disappointment can be a divine appointment. That's what it was with Joseph. His disappointments were a divine appointment because God was working even in all of that, all of his trouble. He was alone now. He could have felt overwhelmed by bitterness, by grief, by unforgiveness, hurt by his own flesh and blood, his spirit crushed. Imagine how he might have felt of that rejection, that hurt, that loss, that separation from his family. It says of Joseph that his soul was in anguish. We see that where later they talked about what had happened in Genesis 42, verse 21, and they said one to another, "We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw anguish of his soul when he besought us and we were not here." Imagine as he was there in that very deep pit, crying out, "Help! Don't leave me here! I'm going to die!" They heard his cry, but they would not listen to it. They saw the anguish of his soul. "We would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us." Just looking back. And at this moment, here now, we can see Joseph in the pit, and then a slave. And Joseph learned through all of this to trust God at every turn. Joseph was learning here that we can trust God in disappointing times. We can trust Him still when it seems like our world is turned upside down, when it seems like everything is going wrong. What matters is God is with us. The Lord was with Joseph. He was close to God. This is a recurring theme, that the Lord was with Joseph. We'll see that referred to later. And so we see that Joseph now, he was sold to this high-ranking Egyptian called Potiphar. Potiphar was high up in the hierarchy of the day. And Joseph was now in his employ as a slave. Joseph put his heart into what he did. He showed integrity in the workplace. He showed integrity in the tasks that he was given, menial though they were. He did the small things well, and God blessed him for it. God blessed him for what he did. Eventually we see that Joseph was elevated within the household, within the servants, to be the supervisor of the other servants. He became supervisor of Potiphar's household. We see that in verse 2 of Genesis 39. And it says that the Lord was with Joseph. That's what made the difference. The Lord was with Joseph. Genesis 39, verse 2. And he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. A slave, a servant, yet counted as a prosperous man. He was a good administrator. He was a hard-working. Potiphar saw this, the quality of this man, the integrity of Joseph in the workplace. It goes on, Genesis 30, from 3 to 4. And his master, Potiphar, saw that the Lord was with him. He recognized this. The Lord was with Joseph. And it says, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight. And he served him. And he made him overseer over his house. All that he had, he put into his hand. Joseph showed integrity in the workplace, such that Potiphar, his master, entrusted him with charge over all his household affairs. He put all into his hands. He made him overseer of his house, the supervisor, the administrator, the one in charge. And we see how the Lord blessed Joseph. Verse 5, and it came to pass from the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he, Potiphar, had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. Joseph worked well in the small things. He was made the overseer, and the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house. The blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. When Joseph worked, he worked as unto the Lord. And so should we that are in the workplace, that are in the workspace. We should work as unto the Lord. You might work for a boss who gives you a hard time, or maybe you get some duties and hours that are not always easy. But yet, as a Christian in the workplace, when you have some work to do it well, like Joseph did. He wasn't really working for Potiphar, or later for Pharaoh or the jailer, as it turned out, but he was working as unto the Lord. He showed integrity in the workplace, and it was recognized. When we work as unto the Lord. Genesis 39 verse 6 we read, "And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had, save the bread which he did eat." He just left everything in Joseph's hands. He knew Joseph would do it well. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favoured. Now here we see the next thing that happened was that Joseph faced temptation. He was young and handsome, and Potiphar's wife, the wife of the master, the Egyptian's master, the Potiphar's wife, who's not named, she chased him. She chased after him. She was a married woman, yet she chased after Joseph. And he knew it was wrong. He was the head of the house. No one was around. He could have got away with it. No one would have known to the temptation by Potiphar's wife. But Joseph had a healthy fear of God. He had integrity in the home place, if you like, the household of Potiphar. He had integrity there when no one was watching. He had a healthy fear of God, and he refused temptation. As we see in Genesis 39, verse 9, when he refused the woman, he said, "There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he, Potiphar, anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" He knew it was sin against his master to take his master's wife, and he knew it was sin against God. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? He had integrity. He stood by his principles. No one else was watching. He could have got away with it, but no, he stood for the right. He stood for purity. He stood for God. He stood with his faith intact, with integrity. Yet Potiphar's wife now made a false accusation. She took his garment as he fled, and she used that and said, "Oh, he tried to lie with me." And this false accusation landed Joseph in prison. It was false, yet accused and locked up for this false accusation. And it says, verse 20 of Genesis 39, "And Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison." Here was Joseph, falsely accused, shut away now, as the bars locked behind him, as the prison doors clanged behind him. He was locked there down in the king's dungeon, bound with chains. And things got worse. Things got worse for Joseph. Yet God with him in all his trials, because sometimes our disappointments are God's appointments. And Joseph stayed faithful, even in this time where his name was stained, falsely accused. God loved him still, because he maintained his integrity. He rose to a place of honour. And even in the prison now, we see Genesis 39:23. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand. This responsibility within the prison, because the Lord was with him. That's what made the difference. The integrity of Joseph. The Lord was with him. Which he did. The Lord made it to prosper. So the prison keeper now gave Joseph that role of oversight, of leadership, responsibility. Yet again, Joseph was shown favour. And yet again, Joseph rose above his circumstances. He got just about as low as he could go. In the pit, now in the prison, the dungeon. Yet he rose above his circumstances again. Joseph continued to be faithful. And like Joseph too, we can be true to God, must be true to God. The Lord again blessed Joseph in all of his work, because he put his heart into it. He wasn't half-hearted, he was wholehearted. He was serving as unto the Lord. And even in the prison, he was given this responsible charge. And the Lord again blessed him in all his work. The jailer gave him charge over all the other prisoners. And now in the prison, we know the story goes in the prison that he helped the chief butler, the cupbearer, to restore his position in Pharaoh's office. He interpreted the dreams there of the two men. One was put to death, and one who was put back into the king's palace, back into the Pharaoh's service, restored to his position. And the deal was really the Pharaoh should now not forget Joseph, but he did. Joseph was forgotten again. Joseph was neglected again. And the cupbearer forgot his promise to mention about Joseph's innocence to the Pharaoh. It took now some 2 years when Pharaoh had 2 dreams. And the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Pharaoh was tearing his hair out because he wanted someone to tell him the meaning of the dreams. He knew these dreams had meaning, had significance, and he called this one and that one his various and aid to guide him, to the wise counsel, to give him advice and to interpret, to bring meaning as to these dreams. But no one could. And then the cupbearer, the light went on. He remembered Joseph. Joseph interpreted my dream. He remembered Joseph and his skills to interpret dreams. And he told Pharaoh of this. And then Genesis 41 verse 14, the story goes on. And Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. Joseph, we've got to get Joseph. And they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And Joseph, it says, he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. Now, Joseph had been in prison maybe 3 years. I don't know if he had a 3-year-long beard, but he had to get shaved and he had to get fitted out. He had to come into the king's palace before Pharaoh. And Joseph was beckoned in. Call him hastily. Get him hastily out of the dungeon. And Joseph was called, brought to, and he interpreted those dreams that meant about 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And Joseph suggested storing food in preparation, to store the food in the years of plenty for the years of famine, to store the food during the good harvest years for those years of lack. And Pharaoh liked his proposal. He saw the wisdom. His man Joseph was a wise man. And so Joseph, taken hastily out of the dungeon, out of the prison of the Pharaoh, this same night would be wearing the king's ring on his hand and elevated to a position of honour. Pharaoh made Joseph the head of state to implement the plans for the upcoming famine. From the prison to the palace. Joseph was here now, and God was working. He had already been working, but now it had come to that place, that point. Joseph was exalted over Egypt. He was 30 at this time. Genesis 41 verse 39, we read that Pharaoh said unto Joseph, for as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none discreet and wise as thou art. He saw that Joseph was discreet. He saw that Joseph had wisdom, that he had integrity. Verse 40, thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. Joseph had endured some 13 long years of adversity. 13 long years. Now Joseph became governor, the second in command of all that Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had. And we pick up the story again in verse 41 of 41. Genesis 41, verse 41. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed vestures of fine linen, and put a chain around his neck. And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, "Bow the knee!" And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt." Joseph had now a gold ring, a personal chariot, fine linen, and the control of all Egypt's grain. And he was given now an Egyptian name. And apparently the Egyptian name has the meaning of the Saviour of the world. He was exalted such that he was recognised as, this is the Saviour of the world. And he was married to an Egyptian priest's daughter, 30 years old. He'd had 13 years of suffering and struggle, and now God made Joseph the most influential person in all the known world at that time, second only to Pharaoh. His wisdom and his planning saved the lives of people not only from Egypt, but many other nations. Joseph showed integrity in the workplace, in those various workplaces. Joseph, in Potiphar's household, Joseph showed integrity in that life space, if you like. His whole life was integrity. His whole life was faithfulness to God from beginning through to the end. Faithful to God. He walked with integrity. Now, I was talking this morning about another Bible character, Joshua, and how the Bible largely shows people warts and all. It doesn't hide the kind of defects. You know, that's the story. Warts and all is how, you know, when kings used to get their portraits painted, they would say, but the Bible shows it warts and all. Shows us the defects and the weaknesses and the failures and faults of the people of God, as it did with Joshua, as I referred to this morning. But Joseph is one that, it's interesting, not a single word of reproof. He had really an unblemished record as far as his life record in the Word goes. He had integrity. He was faithful to God. And he knew God's protection from the pit, through the prison, to the palace. God was with him every step, every place, every moment. And not a single word of reproof, of fault found. His faith was unwavering despite the accusations. He showed a faithfulness no matter what. And so we see God's hand was there with Joseph in each of those chapters of his life. Even in the delays and the disappointments along the way, and the setbacks, and the prison time, and the time of being forsaken by his own brothers, in the time of being falsely accused, in the time of being forgotten by those who should have remembered him. And God used the trials to purify and strengthen Joseph, to make him the man that God wanted him to be, to shape and make the man Joseph. From Genesis 42 through 50, we read how the famine struck, and it brought all people from nations to get help, including his brothers from Israel. Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt to buy some grain. Genesis 42, verses 1 to 3. And while there, they met their long-lost brother, but they did not recognize him. You know, he'd had a shave, he had some clothes on, he had a bit of an Egyptian look to him that he never had before. There was something different about the changed when he came to Egypt, but he was still the same man. But they did not recognize him. It says that Joseph's brothers came bowing down to him. They recognized his authority, recognized the position that they had to come beseech him for grain. And as they bowed down, Joseph's prophecy, the dream that he had in the beginning. But they could not recognize him. But he knew them. And he remembered the dream that he'd had when he was just a young boy. And Joseph, after testing them in different ways, he made himself known to them. Imagine what it would have been like as he revealed, I am Joseph. How they would have felt. You know, they'd have, wouldn't they? They'd have been really worried, afraid. Here is Joseph, and he's got the authority of the land to put us to death. And rightly so. And so we read in verse 1 to 3 of 5, Genesis 45, 1 to 3. Then Joseph could not restrain himself. He could not refrain himself before all of them that stood by him. And he cried, cause every man to go out from me. He just wanted it to be him and his brothers. And there stood no man with him while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. Verse 2, and he went to land. And the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? And he could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. They've been knocking their knees, that have been really worried. What is he going to do to us? As he revealed his identity to his brothers, he gave them for their wrongdoing. What grace! The integrity of man, the forgiveness of their wrongdoing. Joseph saw that it was the hand of God in his life. Everything that had happened to him. Everything that he'd gone through. Verse 8 of Genesis 45. Genesis 40, verse 8. So now it was not you that sent me hither. Yet God did. God sent me here. And he hath made me. He hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. You didn't send me here. God did. I'm here by God's appointment. And Joseph forgave them and to come and settle in Egypt with their father Jacob during the time of famine. Of course, I'm cutting the story short here. There's various comings and goings. But the point is that Joseph embraced his brother. Now, I am Joseph. He welcomed them. He embraced them. He forgave them. And we know the story goes that Jacob and his family moved to Egypt to be with Joseph. And Jacob's descendants stayed in Egypt some 100 years until the time of Moses. Joseph lived years. In Genesis 50 verse 26, we see that he passed away. And it's interesting that Joseph, that his bones would go to the promised land to be buried. He had faith in that. So the story of Joseph shows us that no matter what, God is in control. Even in the pit, in the prison, in Potiphar's house, and in the palace, Joseph was the same man. He had integrity right through. He wasn't changeable to suit the circumstances. He wasn't overwhelmed by the disappointment whilst there was some anguish. He made it through, and God refined him and made him the man, Joseph. And likewise for you, for me, in the workspace, in the work where we can, so that the quality of our work, the character of our workmanship, the integrity of our life is not stained by neglect or slackness or tardiness or sloppiness, but there's integrity in the workplace. And there's integrity in the home place. We're in the household, when we're amongst, in a family setting. Joseph was there in Potiphar's household, and he showed honor to Potiphar, the master of the house. He showed due respect to the married status of this woman, that she was his. He could not have her, and he was faithful. He showed integrity. And in the home setting, in the family and relationship space, we need to have integrity. And likewise, the life space, really his whole life, the whole extent of it, even as he was elevated, and he could have been prideful. It could have gone to his head, the authority that he had. It could have gone to his head. I'm the ruler now, second only to Pharaoh. You know, what I can do to my brothers now, I can really hurt them. But he didn't, did he? He loved them. He embraced them. He gave them. He showed the grace that God shows to us, doesn't he? And Joseph shows us that no matter what, God is in control. God is in control. And no matter what circumstances, no matter what disappointments, we can trust God, as Joseph did. And in it all, God is in charge. He is in charge. And he will allow what he will allow. He will stop what he will stop. He is sovereign. He is master. And we are but clay in his hands. And we see verse 20 of Genesis 50, just to wrap up, as Joseph spoke to his brethren. And, you know, they were saying, they were bringing to memory what had happened, what they had done. They knew that it was bad, they were guilty, they were ashamed. And Joseph reassured them here in Genesis 50 verse 20. He says, "But as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. You thought to do evil to me, but it was God who meant it unto good." God meant good. And likewise, we can think, looking back, the hurts, the hardships, the hatred, you know, as Christ hated without a cause. People falsely accusing, people murmuring, backstabbing, friends turning against you, whatever it be. We all have moments of that. God brings good even out of that. And it says that all things work together to those who are called according to his purpose, to those who love him, that all things work together for good. And so God's divine purpose will prevail. His divine appointments can be sometimes our life's disappointments, because God is making you the man, the woman that he wants you to be. And even when others try to harm and hurt, it can still turn out the glory of bettering. So be encouraged tonight. I know, it's perhaps very real for some of you here. These experiences that Joseph had of that integrity tested, of that hurt that can happen in life, yet can bring good even out of that which is hurtful and hard. You might say, "Well, preacher, it's for you to say. What about what I'm going through?" I can't honestly say. Someone who I was trying to empathise with them, and I said, "I can understand what you're going through." And then I thought, no, I really don't understand what you're going through. And it made me feel really teary that I can't understand what you're going through. I'm not in your shoes. I've got my own cross to carry. I've got my own things I'm going through, have gone through, will go through, as we all have. I can't understand what you're going through. Your cross is different from my cross, and your burden might be heavier than mine. But God helping us carry one another's burdens, can't we? The Bible says we should bear one another's burdens. and most of all to cast it upon the Lord. See, Joseph showed that character, that integrity right through, and so can you and me. In whatever space of life, the work space, the home place, the life space, as it were, a whole life that we're growing, and we might spend some moments in the pit, or Potiphar's household, or the prison. Ultimately, he will vindicate.